This video will be a bit different from my other videos on this channel.
And the same goes for me, because this guy here has a video called 2 Logical Questions for Atheists, which are really arguments kind of in the form of a question. These are a first cause argument and a fine-tuning argument. Already it's rare for me to just state up front what's going to be in the video, but I'm doing that for a reason that I think will make it a bit more fun to deal with these very standard arguments yet again. In the comments of his video, this guy is very clear that he doesn't want to hear about science, because that's just about how things work, it has nothing to do with logic, and likewise he doesn't want to hear us talking about things we know, things we've learned. No, he is very clear, very specific. What he wants is to hear how his claims defy logic. He wants to be made aware of any deficiencies in his logical thinking. Only. And that to me sounds like an invitation to do something that I normally avoid doing excessively, which is to play Name That Fallacy. So that's what this video is. He asked for it and he'll get it. Now, having said that, I'm not claiming to be completely thorough about this. I'm just going to make some observations about things that I find to be wrong with his reasoning. And if you, as a viewer, find that I didn't talk about something, do feel free to leave it in the comments. Anyway, this will be pretty long, so I better stop jabbering. Let's go.
And I just have 2 logics to present to atheists, or people who simply think that this universe is running without any external influence, all on its own.
I find that phrasing really interesting. People who think the universe is running without any external influence, all on its own. It kind of makes it sound like rather than being about a creator of the universe, this video is going to be about an external sustainer of the universe. But no, I already told you what the arguments are going to be. The first one's a first cause argument that's obviously about a creator, not a sustainer, and has nothing to do with whether the universe is currently running with or without external influence. I don't know, it kind of got my hopes up when I heard it that there would be something different here, but at least in that sense, there's not.
The first question is perhaps a more common one. The more common argument of the infinite regress, right? And perhaps it has become more popular after this, the debate between Javed Akhtar and Mufti Ismail.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. I have no idea what that means, but I'm sure you're right.
The infinite regress question, but I'll pose it here once again if you haven't heard it before, right? The fact that if I have to do something, say I have to pick up something, and I need permission from somebody else, and he needs permission from somebody else, and he needs from somebody else, and this goes on for infinity, will I ever get the permission to pick up this thing? Of course, the logical answer is no, because it's going on for infinity, right? Likewise, the fact that we human beings are here, the universe exists, we needed a creator for it, but that creator needed a creator, and that creator needed a creator, it went on for infinity. Would we ever exist? And the logical answer is no, because this cycle is going on for infinity. So logically, we couldn't exist. The fact that we are existing, it means there was some end to this infinite chain, right? There had to be somebody who was not dependent on this cycle, who was independent, right?
Okay, that was a long clip by my standards. You think I'm gonna have a short response? Okay, so again, he just wants to hear what's wrong with his reasoning. So, hi video guy, I think there's some problems with your reasoning. Before I get to that though, let's talk about what this argument is. And what it isn't, because as I mentioned, he implied that this would be an argument for people who think the universe is self-sustaining. But that's not what this is about. This kind of temporal first cause argument is not about that. It's weird that you would imply that this is about one thing and then make it not about that thing. But not a problem, I know what I'm dealing with, that's fine. Now the basic argument here is kind of a William Lane Craig thing, that an actual infinite can't be formed by successive addition. And this is the commonality that the analogy of permission granters is supposed to have with an infinite temporal chain of creators or causes. They're supposed to both be chains of infinite steps of non-zero duration, which thus has an infinite length in time. And it's posited that if time really flows from moment to moment along this timeline, the present never would have arrived because it would be infinitely far from the start, for lack of a better word. There is no start, and if you start from infinitely far back, you don't get to where we are infinitely far into the future by time ticking away second by second. So that's what I'll talk about here, but to be clear, atheism doesn't preclude a first cause in any sense, including this one. In fact, there will be many, many atheists who are with you in thinking that there is one. We can talk about first causes all day as a philosophical exercise, which I will be doing, but atheism is not the non-belief in a first cause. It's a non-belief in a God, willful, conscious thinking. And this argument doesn't address that, at least not your presentation of it, and thus the argument immediately fails to do anything relevant for you. You might as well never have opened your mouth because it doesn't touch on the real point of disagreement. Your worst problem is not a logical one, but rather that the first cause here could be granted to you entirely, as it often is in conversations between atheists and theists, not even for the sake of argument, but sincerely, and if that's done, it has no effect on atheism whatsoever. Someone who accepts this does not suddenly believe in God. It's irrelevant. But okay, we'll entertain the argument itself just for the sake of it. It's fun, I want to do it, so we'll do it. Let's start off small and simple. All the way through that clip, you're begging the question. You're assuming your conclusion in your premises. For humans to exist, we need a creator. At the end of the chain of causation, or the start, I should say, there has to be not just something, but somebody. I'm sure as a Muslim, you have some sort of justification for why you think it has to be a somebody, but we're talking about this video, and in this video, no justification was stated. Now, it could be very charitably interpreted, very charitably, that you didn't initially mean to speak in those terms. But then you went through this analogy with these people granting permission, and because you had it in your head that you're talking about people, you smuggled in this incidental feature of your analogy when you moved on to talking about a chain of causation for the reality of the universe with elements that don't necessarily need to be people. In other words, this could charitably be interpreted as a brain fart. I don't interpret it that way. I don't think that's what this is. But I want to very clearly point out anyway that the personhood in your analogy is not one of the essential relations between the analogy and reality. The analogy isn't about somebody doing something. At no point in this reasoning is a person of any kind required. Not in the analogy or the reality. You could replace the people in the analogy with a chain of delayed chemical reactions. It wouldn't change anything. Now, that said, I do think that regardless, when you say therefore there has to be somebody, you do mean that this argument gets you to somebody as opposed to something. I think that you mean that. Correct me if I'm wrong. All I'm saying is I don't think you're taking that somebodyness from the somebodyness in the analogy itself. If anything, I think it's just a basic old non sequitur where you already think it's somebody, and so instead of saying therefore first cause, you say therefore somebody. You're not, I think, using the personhood in the analogy as a bridge to the conclusion that somebody did something. Instead, you're jumping to that conclusion based on nothing at all. That's much better. Anyway, next up, and this is the most important thing by far, you have an implicit false dichotomy here, which absolutely must be accepted for your argument to work. It's the basis of your entire argument, and if it's not true, or if it's not accepted to be true by your opponent, everything falls to pieces. So your question implies that the available options are a temporal infinite regress or a temporal first cause, and that there are no further possibilities. But there are, a lot of them. Let's talk about them, because I want it to be clear just how much of a false dichotomy this is. To start with, it's conceivable that instead of being at the end of an infinite temporal chain of causes, the universe could sit on top of a bottomless stack of hierarchical grounding relations, and have no temporal beginning at all. These are the sorts of arguments that Thomas Aquinas had in mind with his first cause argument. This has since been very often misunderstood. This type of causal relationship can't be addressed by appealing to the problems of infinite time, and so it's not vicious in that way. Whether it is vicious or not, whether an infinite stack of these dependencies is a problem, is debatable. I don't really care, I'm just saying it's a third option. But let's move beyond infinite regress now. What if neither of these applies? What if there's no origin of the universe in time, and what if there's no explanation for the universe's existence beyond a certain depth? Because if we're allowing for the existence of a god as a brute or necessary fact, that opens the door for the universe to be the same. Maybe in actual fact it makes just as little sense to ask why the universe exists as theists think it makes to ask why God exists. Where did the universe come from could be the same type of question as where did God come from? In other words, if some aspect of physical reality is truly fundamental, that is a hierarchical first cause in the Thomistic sense. There's an added benefit if this is the case with the universe instead of God, which is that we posit one entity fewer. And saying it like that might make it sound like God is just one extra entity. It's just a small little thing tacked on at the end. That doesn't change a whole lot, but no. God is less parsimonious in the extreme, and the Islamic conception of God is possibly the worst in this regard. It's an infinite, necessarily existing mind containing an idea of a universe that's complete in every single detail and all possible aspects of all possible counterfactual realities. In other words, contrary to the often heard assertions that God is simple, the concept of God means that it contains the total information of an infinite number of possible universes. If anything, it's maximally complex. It also has the ability to do literally anything, including actualizing imaginary universes into previously non-existent physical reality, creating it from nothing, through no mechanism but its own will. This is not just one little thing added on to the start of the causal chain. This is a staggeringly huge addition of complexity. Whereas if the universe itself is the brute or necessary fact at the base of reality, all that needs to be posited is the universe, which we already know exists. Now, in both cases, the questions will remain the same. Why are things like this? Why is there something rather than nothing? Yes, these questions apply if there's a God. They apply no matter what there is. But in both cases, because we've defined these things as brute or necessary, the answer is going to be because that's how it is. And maybe because they can't be otherwise. Unsatisfying answers maybe, but no less satisfying in the one case than in the other. But hey, at least between the universe and God, one of them is distinctly more parsimonious than the other, and in that sense it is more satisfying. Next up, since origination prior to the Planck time would most likely not be a temporal event, since it was the origin, or at least the start of inflation, of space-time itself, objections based on temporal causation don't apply. The same basic issue applies to the Hawking no-boundary proposal, where talking about before the universe is similar to talking about south of the South Pole. It just doesn't make any sense. This is talking about the Big Bang, of course, and I'm not giving you a scientific answer to anything here. Again, I'm just presenting alternative possibilities to show that this is a false dichotomy. And by the way, don't get confused with me using terms like prior or before time. I'm only doing that because natural languages are not adapted to discussing events before time. See, I did it again. What else am I supposed to do? There's no very precise way to talk about these things in commonly understood language, so we'll just have to put up with it. So the basic idea with this point is that the apparent sequential causation that we experience in the universe may just have no applicability beyond spacetime. These arguments for a temporal first cause are based on a conception of reality that was developed within the universe, inferred solely from experiences within spacetime. And so if there is reality beyond spacetime, whatever that means, then our entire understanding of how anything works is incredibly limited. And we take that extremely limited view of reality and assume it must be true of all reality, even beyond the basic physical substrate of the experiences that we have, which is presumptuous to say the least. Alright, next. It's possible that the universe originated at the start of time, but from a non-temporal process. Imprecise language again. Islamic apologists often insist that something can't create itself. It's a big talking point, and those among your opponents who occupy this position would tend to agree with a similar statement. Time can't meaningfully originate from a process operating within that very same time itself. As such, the possibility of a non-temporal process, that is, whether anything can happen outside of time, depends heavily on the nature of time itself. Is it a dimension, an entropic illusion? Does it apply on the quantum scale in any meaningful way? There are a bunch of questions like these, and the answers to them will be important if we want to understand if non-temporal processes can occur at all and what exactly that means. And I think talking about this would have value for theists, too. After all, God is beyond time, but does things. His creation of the universe is a causal process that transcends time. Well, what does that mean exactly? And it gets to a point I probably should mention, which is none of the possibilities I've presented so far should be all that challenging for a Muslim to comprehend. Because after all, God's creation of time in Islam was not itself an event in time. No origin of time would be. So it's strange that you're limiting the options to either time was caused by infinite delayed events in previous time, or time was caused by the first event in time. In the analogy, the first granting of permission. I don't know if even you would accept these options if you really thought about it. The origin of time in Islam is not itself the result of a temporal chain of causes. God transcends time. He performs an eternal, transcendent act of creation. He's not merely the first domino in a sequence of dominoes. He's beyond the dominoes entirely, in a timeless context where that type of causation just does not apply, which you'll note is a lot like the possibilities I've suggested so far, all of which are basically compatible with the Islamic conception of time and the universe and origins. Our only disagreement is that I'm suggesting it doesn't require an act of will or of mind. The next possibility I'll talk about, though, you might have a bit more difficulty with, because it's the cyclical view, that time proceeds infinitely in a cyclical manner where no cause is first. In this view, there's no definite origin point of time or of the universe overall. Time is a circle, and therefore there are no issues of temporal infinite regress and no origin point to explain. And this is a point where I would expect the objection to be raised that this isn't how the universe seems to be based on science. Okay, but we're not talking about science here, so it's irrelevant. We're talking about logically possible alternatives. It's to show that there are not only two possible positions on this issue. It's very clear from the comments on the original video that this is not supposed to be about scientific answers to anything. There's no reason to bring any of that up or discuss which of them is better supported than any other. So in this context, the cycle of time gets to stay. Alright, last but not least, and this is not an exhaustive list, but this'll be enough. A past eternal universe is possible in B theory of time views where there's no privileged present moment, which is constantly moving forward as if along a track, and where the flow of time is illusory. B theory views can allow for a past eternal universe because there's no true current moment flowing in time until it arrived at now. There's just an eternal universal block which happens to be infinite along the time dimension in one or more directions. The entire timeline just existing as a complete whole. Now, of course, when the infinite regress of causes is within the universe, this does mean that it's not leading to the universe, it's leading to the current state of the universe. The universe overall would be a brute fact or necessary, or maybe created by God. It could be anything, really. The point is just there are ways to defang the concept of a temporal infinite regress. Now, you seem to implicitly assume an A-theory-like view for an unstated reason, and for some reason you assume that your opponents will automatically do the same. It always seems a bit strange to me when Abrahamic monotheists do this, since most of them believe in a God outside the universe who can view all moments simultaneously as a unified whole, which sounds suspiciously like a B-theory block universe. Anyway, that's enough alternatives. The point is, you wanted a logical answer, and the logical answer to your false dichotomy is that there are logically possible alternatives, and therefore your view doesn't win by default as soon as you debunk a temporal infinite regress, and so your view requires further support. You asked in the comments how your claims defy logic. Well, your claim about the problem of temporal infinite regress doesn't defy logic, but you're acting like there are no logically possible alternatives beyond these two prongs of the fork you made, and you're portraying your position as more likely on that basis, which is unimaginative at best and fallacious at worst. Really, your entire point here, if it's supposed to apply to atheists or people who think, the universe is running on its own? Your point here relies on an unjustified, falsely generalized assumption about which position it is that your opponents actually hold, trying to confine them to the temporal infinite regress fork of your regress or God false dichotomy, a view that very likely most of them don't hold at all. Atheism itself makes no claim even related to this topic, because it's not some positive viewpoint on the origin of the universe. It's just not believing God did it. And so a multitude of possibilities as to opinions on origins remain open to someone who doesn't believe in God. What I'm trying to say is that all you have here is one giant straw man fallacy. Now, all of this destroys any relevance that your analogy has. It's completely useless. But I was thinking to myself whether this counts as a false analogy, and I don't actually think so. I think the analogy itself is fine. It just happens to be an analogy to something nobody's really talking about. It's a fine enough analogy for an infinite series of causes and effects, where causes take time to produce the effects. If we're talking about how things would be if that did accurately describe the origin of the universe, and there were infinite delayed steps required to lead to the universe, that each actually had to happen in actual sequence in actual time, starting from the first one, which of course could never be in the first place because it's infinity steps ago, and therefore there can't be a first, then this analogy would be relevant enough. You'd be able to say, look, by this example you can tell that it doesn't work. It's just not all that relevant to the actual discussion. That's assuming, though, that I was correct about the personhood in your analogy not being what you used to establish the personhood of the first cause. If I'm wrong about that, and that personhood of the first cause was in fact meant to be inferred from the personhood in the analogy, that would be really dumb. But I still don't think that's what you were going for. What it is regardless, though, is a case of special pleading, because this is supposed to point to God, specifically. As you said, it's supposed to get us to somebody did it, which can only happen if you impose the condition that the chain has to end at somebody and nothing else. That one thing that you don't want to have to follow the rule doesn't have to follow the rule everything else has to follow. In the analogy, all the permission granters need permission, except whichever one you choose to stop the chain with. That one gets to be the special permission granter. And you know what? Go for it, but be aware that if you see this as legitimate, you don't have any room to object to similar special pleading by your opponents. Give God special treatment, but just realize that there's no consistent way to justify that excludes the same special treatment for other stuff. If you claim God requires no explanation, I can claim the same thing about the universe. If you can say it's okay for you to do it because you define God as necessary, I can say it's okay for me to do it because I define the universe as necessary. These are equally arbitrary, but you're not portraying them as equal. You're rejecting this possibility for the universe and allowing it for God. The universe itself can't be necessary, can't be eternal. Nothing about it can be the first cause. It requires at least one causal step prior to it, which just so happens to be the somebody that you mentioned, where the causal chain is allowed to stop, which is really hard to see as anything other than an expression of your personal preference. You want your answer, and so you'll accept claims about it that you won't accept about any other answer. You know, mental phenomena can just happen for no reason, and so can any ability to do literally anything, including conjuring things from nothing. Wants and willful choices can happen with no input whatsoever. There's no cause, there's no way they work, it's just how things are. They don't even need time to operate in. All these incomprehensibly strange and complex phenomena, which go completely against everything we observe in reality, can just simply be how they are, and you feel that there's no need to explain anything about them, and you're totally comfortable with this. But only if it's God, okay? Don't you dare suggest that anything else could just be how it is for no reason at all? Independent of time, not needing any reason for anything it does, bringing whatever into existence from nothing because that's just how reality works. Don't be ridiculous. You can only say that about my thing. Everything other than my thing needs to be explained on every conceivable level. And if you reach a level where there seems to be no deeper explanation, well, there still has to be one because I say so that's God. If the causeless, reasonless cause doesn't go through the pointless middleman of mind and will that I'm imposing on it, it doesn't count. It's so transparent. You'll only seriously consider one answer because it's the answer you want. It makes it really hard to take this seriously because this is not a serious conversation. It's not about what may or may not be true. It never has been. So overall, in summary, you have some issues here. The false dichotomy is probably the worst one, because that's the toothpick this entire building is balancing on. And beyond that, there's just not much of an argument. So that's about all I want to say that's actually relevant to the argument here. There is one thing I want to talk about, though, before we move on, that I was thinking about while I was recording this, which is that theists have this habit of approaching questions about fundamental reality based on everyday human experience. This is where you get arguments like a painting must have a painter, or effects have causes, or things that happen in time, which is the big one in this case. It's taking like a very basic, intuitive understanding of how the world around us works and applying it to everything, basically. How things intuitively seem to us must be how things actually are on basically every level. And this is taken to be a universal, fundamental, inviolable truth. And when you bring up that maybe that's not actually how things work, they'll tell you you're crazy. How could it possibly not work like that? Obviously it works like that. You're the weird one. Until they start talking about their first cause, which breaks every one of these conventions. This rule that things must conform to our intuition suddenly gets tossed away, showing that they don't actually believe that that's how reality has to be. It can violate these intuitive, inferential ideas. Nothing about God fits with these aspects of the intuitive human experience that's otherwise taken to be so undeniable, which admits of the possibility of the reality of things simply not conforming to them at all on the more fundamental levels, God or no God. So trying to force the conversation to conform to these terms makes no sense. Our intuitions about these things and our inferences from our human level experiences don't mean anything. Trying to confine ourselves to this way of thinking gets us nowhere. Theists reject from the outset what they insist in their arguments that we accept. The endless insistence on the validity of this hypocrisy can get kind of irritating, and I guess I'm having a moment of irritation about it, so I just wanted to mention it. Alright, I'm going to split it here, because this whole thing is really long, and it's a bit heavy. I feel like it'll be too long if I leave it all together. So come back for the second question next time. And in the meantime, thank you very much for watching. Subscribe and like if you would be so kind. If you like the channel, please do consider supporting. Huge thanks to all of my supporters. My family thanks you immensely. Have a nice week. See you next time.